So, a couple of weeks back, we had a severe thunderstorm on Saturday morning. Does anybody remember that? Yeah, it kind of sticks out in my mind, this particular storm does, because I got up early that morning, and I had to go to answer nature's call, and I went back to sleep for about an hour. I got up an hour later, and I could hear water. And I thought, oh, that sounds like a beautiful waterfall. Just wonderful. So I start walking down the stairs, and I'm still coming with weight. I'm kind of groggy. And I make it to our downstairs, and there's the living room, and I go to the dining room, and there's the most beautiful waterfall coming out of the ceiling of our dining room. And I thought, great. And I stepped down on my bare feet, the carpet was so wet. It's like stepping right into a mud puddle, and it kind of felt that way too. The carpet was all squishy and gross. Pieces of the ceiling, like plaster and what do you call that stuff?
Sheetrock.
Drywall, the sheetrock were kind of coming down around me, almost like hail, and I'm just sitting there, looking up, thinking, what next? So the first thing I do is politely ask my husband Steve to come downstairs. Okay, maybe not politely. Maybe I just screamed at the top of my lungs, Steve, get down here, you won't believe what's going on. And I grabbed the tote to catch the water, and about that time the phone rang. And generally I don't answer the phone, but I looked and it was Mom, and I thought, oh my gosh, something's happened. So I answered the phone, and Mom's trying to tell me about this storm warning that's going on. And I'm like, man, I can't talk. Man, the whole season's coming down on my head. I just got enough to deal with right now. And she's like, oh, okay. And so she hung up, and we started messing with this storm stuff. And about that time, I got the waters finally down to just a slow drip. Steve's taking care of that upstairs, and I'm thinking, okay, we need to shop vac, we gotta get this, we gotta get that, we gotta get this done. About that time, Beth comes upstairs from the basement, and she says, what can I do to help, Mom? And so I said, go over to your cousin's and get his shop vac. I've already called him and told him, and bring it back so we can start sucking this water out. And she says, okay. So she takes off to go in her car, and a few minutes later, I don't know, I get the wild idea that I need to move my truck from the backyard to the driveway. I still don't know why I thought I had to do that, but I did. And the minute I go outside, it happens. I realize, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I go outside and the wind is blowing to beat the band, the branches are flying, there's all kinds of neighbors' yard art going around, and the dust and the dirt is all whipped up. But great, I just sent my one and only child in the middle of a storm. What kind of mother am I? Couldn't things get any worse than sending your child out into harm's way? Well, that was one of those kind of moments for me. It's not the only one I've ever had. And surely you've had one before too. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse moment. Ever caught yourself saying those words? Well, at Tennessee Seminary, I volunteered in a homeless shelter in Dubuque, Iowa. And I remember a guy up there, I remembered his name because of his manner of speaking. His name was Carl. But every other word he said was a cuss word, so I remembered him by calling him Cussin' Carl. Anyway, I got to talking to Cussin' Carl one day, and I said, how'd you end up here? And so he told me there was a time when things were good in his life. And he got up one morning and he went to work, only to find out the place where he was working and went under. He had no job. He went back out to his car to leave, only to find out his car was being repossessed. And he thought, surely this has just got to be a fluke. There's got to be a mistake. I know payments have been being made. So he walks back to his house, only to find out that his woman had left him, and all the payments that he thought she'd been making, and the rents, and the utilities he thought she'd been paying, well, she hadn't been. And she had taken off with all the money. And so that's what happened. And just when he thought things couldn't get any worse, he lost his job, he lost his car, he lost his home, he lost his wife, and he lost everything. And he wound up at the homeless shelter. So that's just like I can't even talk this morning, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse. So that's one of those kind of times, at least it was for Carl. And as I read this passage that we just read from Matthew, I think it would qualify as one of those just when I thought things couldn't get any worse moments, at least for Peter. Can you hear him talking about this story afterwards to some of his friends who weren't there? Yeah, this one time we were out on the beach with Jesus, and he told me and the other disciples to get in his boat and go across the Sea of Galilee. So we did. And we were there. We were about in the middle of the lake, and all of a sudden, one of those wild storms just popped up. And we were getting battered by the waves. We were far, far away from the land. There was no way we could swim. And the wind was against us. And just then, when I thought that this night couldn't get any worse, here comes this figure walking to us on the water. A ghost was coming for us. We cried out in fear, and then the tide changed. And we heard Jesus speak. And Jesus said these words, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Now if we go back to the original Greek that the New Testament was written in, the words Jesus actually says are ego eimi, which means I am. Kind of reverts back to the Old Testament. We've all heard the I am before. Jesus also uses the word tharsio. And when we translate that, it's a verb which means more than simply not to be afraid. This word actually means to be firm or resolute in the face of danger or adverse circumstances. So Emmanuel, God with us, is saying, hey, I am. He's present. He's walking on the water, and he's instructing his disciples to be firm or resolute in the face of danger or adverse circumstances. Interesting. If we're studying in Matthew, we go back to chapter 10, just a few chapters before today's verse, we hear Jesus teaching his disciples about fear itself. And what Jesus says then are these words. Do not fear those who will kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not two sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. And even the hairs of your head are all counted. So do not be afraid. You are of more value than many sparrows. Everyone therefore who acknowledges me before others, I also will acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But whoever denies me before others, I will also deny before my Father in heaven. Now throughout this passage, it's important to note, Jesus never promises to put an end to the storm. He never says it will all be smooth sailing throughout the lives of my disciples. What Jesus does say is do not fear. What Jesus does say is don't fear what, who can kill the body. Be firm. Be resolute on what truly matters. What stands the test of time. The eternal truths that we know in the Bible. That's what we need to lean on. Like Peter, there are many times in our lives when we feel we're strong, set in our faith. By God, we can just step out there and we too could walk on water like Jesus. And like Peter, there are times when we start to stand up on our own 2 feet and we feel the tempest moving in and we start to sink. We become overwhelmed. Anxiety rains down upon us as waves of depression, despair, and despondency try to drag us further and further down under the sea. And then, just like Peter, we too begin to sink. In his fear, Peter never tries to get back in the boat. Did you notice that? He doesn't yell out for the other disciples, hey Peter, or hey Paul, hey John, throw me a rope, help me. No. The one Peter cries out to is Jesus. The same Jesus who had just commanded his disciples to take heart and not be afraid. And immediately Jesus takes Peter by the hand, Jesus catches him, and he holds him close. And that's when we hear these words. You have little faith. Why did you doubt? Why do we doubt? What is it about our faith that causes us to sink? Especially at those times when it should be obvious that we need Jesus the most. I think that's the challenge in this passage for us today. In comparison to Jesus, every one of us, each and every one of us are people of little faith. But being able to face our doubts, if we're willing to take the time to get to know them, to name them, find out what it is that causes us to doubt, well, this is a good thing. Yes, it would take effort. It would take a lot of soul searching and brutal honesty with ourselves and with God. But I do believe it's necessary work. It's vital work that can help us to grow in our faith if we truly want to grow. If we truly want to be strong, to have the assurance of mind to take heart, to know that Jesus is with us, that we don't have to fear, even in the worst of storms that we encounter. The opportunity is there. We can leave it as a just when I thought things couldn't get any worse moment, or we can remember there is somebody with us all the time. We might not necessarily make our storms go away, but we'll make sure we don't encounter them alone. In the name of the Father, Son, and Spirit, amen.